Ambassador Kethra of the Volanti hegemony stood in the center of the grand navigation chamber and stared at the massive holographic map that floated before her like a ghost made of light and color. Her four violet eyes moved slowly across the familiar patterns of stars and trade routes and empire boundaries until they reached the place where all colors stopped and all routes ended. There, in the western arm of the galaxy, sat a vast region of absolute blackness marked only by a single, pulsing red warning symbol that had not changed in 50,000 years. The Soul Exclusion Zone, human space. She had seen this map 1,000 times since her childhood, but today, it felt different because today she had received orders that made her blood run cold in her veins. "Ambassador," said her aide Torvin, who stood nervously behind her with his scales shifting between pale blue and sickly green. "The High Council has confirmed the mission parameters, and they are not willing to negotiate." On this matter, Kethra did not turn around because she did not want Torvin to see the fear in her eyes. "Tell me again what happened to the survey vessel," she said in a voice that she forced to remain steady. "The science ship Wandering Star was conducting routine mineral scans near the outer boundary of Sector 7 when a spatial anomaly pulled them off course," Torvin explained while his claws clicked nervously against his data tablet. Their last transmission indicated they had crossed into the exclusion zone before they could correct their trajectory, and then all contact was lost. "How many crew members?" 47, Ambassador, including 12 researchers from the Royal Academy. Kethra closed her eyes and let out a slow breath. 47 lives now trapped in the one place in the entire galaxy where no one could help them. Every child in the Concordat learned about the exclusion zone before they learned to count stars or speak in complete sentences. The lesson was always the same, no matter which species taught it. There was once a species called humanity that lived on a small blue world called Earth, and for a brief time they had been part of the galactic community like everyone else. They had been traders and explorers and artists. They've been curious and friendly and eager to learn. And then something terrible had happened, and humanity had changed in ways that still haunted the dreams of 1,000 civilizations. The humans had drawn a line across the stars and retreated behind it, and they had made it very clear what would happen to anyone who crossed that line. In the 50,000 years since then, not a single ship had entered human space and returned. Not one. There were no patrols along the boundary because there did not need to be. There were no weapons platforms or defense stations because the memory of what humans could do was more powerful than any weapon ever built. The Galactic Concordat was an alliance of over 4,000 spacefaring species, and they agreed on almost nothing except for one single law that superseded all others. Do not enter the Soul Exclusion Zone. Do not contact humanity. Do not even think about them too loudly because some said they could hear thoughts across the void of space. Kethra had always believed these warnings were exaggerated stories designed to frighten children into obedience. She had always thought that surely after 50,000 years of isolation the humans must have changed, or evolved, or perhaps even died out entirely. But now she was being asked to find out, and the thought filled her with a terror she had never known before. The High Council believes that since this was an accident, the humans may be willing to negotiate. Torvin continued in a voice that suggested he did not believe this at all. You have been chosen because of your experience in first contact situations and your reputation for remaining calm under pressure. My reputation, Kethra repeated with a bitter laugh. My reputation was built on negotiations with species that actually wanted to negotiate, and not on begging ancient monsters to return our people. Ambassador, I must remind you that refusing this mission would be considered an act of... I am not refusing, she interrupted sharply. I am simply acknowledging the reality that I am being sent to my death, and I would appreciate a moment to process that information. Torvin fell silent, and Kethra was grateful for the quiet. She reached out one slender hand and touched a holographic representation of the exclusion zone and watched as red warning text scrolled across her vision in 17 different languages. Danger. Human territory. Nitrogen monoxide entry permitted. By order of the Galactic Concordat, violators will not be rescued. She thought about the 47 crew members of the Wandering Star and wondered if they were still alive. She thought about their families waiting for news that might never come. She thought about what kind of species could inspire such absolute terror that entire civilizations would rather abandon their own people than risk contact. "Prepare my ship," she said finally. "I will leave within the hour." "Ambassador," Torvin said hesitantly, "there is one more thing you should know before you go." "What is it?" "The High Archivist has requested an audience with you before your departure, and he says he has information that may help you survive this mission." Kethra felt a chill run down her spine at the mention of the High Archivist. Xylos was the oldest living being in the Concordat, and he was one of the few creatures still alive who had actually witnessed the events that led to humanity's isolation. He was also completely insane according to most people who had met him. His mind had been broken by something he had seen long ago, and he spent most of his time locked away in the memory vaults, muttering to himself about shadows and fire and the sound of human laughter. "Why would the High Archivist want to speak with me?" Kethra asked. "He did not say," Torvin replied, "but he was very insistent, and the council has approved the meeting." Kethra nodded slowly and turned away from the map. If she was going to die, then she might as well die with knowledge. Perhaps the mad old archivist could tell her what she was truly facing. Perhaps he could explain why the mere mention of humanity was enough to make the most powerful beings in the galaxy tremble like frightened children. Or perhaps he would simply confirm what she already suspected in the darkest corners of her heart, that some doors were never meant to be opened, and some boundaries were never meant to be crossed. She walked out of the navigation chamber with her head held high and her heart beating fast, and she tried not to think about the fact that she might never see her home again. The stars had never looked so cold and distant as they did in that moment, and somewhere beyond the boundary, in the vast silence of the exclusion zone, something ancient and patient was waiting. The memory vaults were located deep beneath the surface of the Concordat's capital world, in a place where no natural light had touched the stone for over 1,000,000. Ursigithra descended alone through corridors that grew older and stranger with every step, until the walls themselves seemed to be made of compressed time rather than simple rock. The High Archivist Xylos was waiting for her in a chamber at the very bottom of the descent. He was a crystalline being whose body had once sparkled with the light of captured stars, but now his form was cracked and dim and clouded with age. Some said he was over 200,000 years old. Some said he had been alive when the first species in the galaxy learned to speak. Ithra did not know what to believe, but she knew that looking at him filled her with a sadness she could not explain. "You are the one they are sending to the humans," Xylos said in a voice that sounded like mountains grinding together in slow motion. "I can see the fear in your hearts, all four of them beating too fast." "High Archivist," Kethra said with a formal bow, "I was told you have information that might help me survive my mission." "Survive?" The ancient being repeated, and something like laughter echoed through his fractured form. "Child, I do not know if anything I tell you will help you survive, but I can show you why you should be afraid, and perhaps that knowledge will give you wisdom." "I already know the stories," Kethra said carefully. "Every child learns about the humans and what they did. You know nothing," Xylos replied, and his voice dropped to a whisper that somehow filled the entire chamber. "You know the stories your elders chose to tell you, but you do not know the truth, and the truth is so much worse." He moved toward her with a sound like breaking glass, and she forced herself to stand still as his ancient form towered over her. "I was there," he said. "I was young then, only 40,000 years old, and I served as a junior. recorder on the Galactic Council when humanity first made contact with our civilization. Kethra felt her breath catch in her throat. She had not known that Xylos had actually met humans. What were they like? She whispered. They were wonderful, Xylos said, and his voice cracked with something that sounded almost like grief. They were small and fragile, with bodies that broke so easily, and lifespans that lasted barely 100 years, and they were the most beautiful species I had ever encountered. This was not what Kethra had expected to hear. They came to us with open hands and curious minds, the alchemist continued. They brought us music and art and stories, and they asked nothing in return except friendship and knowledge and the chance to explore the stars alongside us. Then what happened? Kethra asked. What changed them into monsters? We happened, Xylos said, and his form flickered with dark light. We, the great and mighty Galactic Concordat, happened to them. He gestured with one crystalline limb, and the air before them came alive with ancient recordings that had been locked away for 50 millennia. Kethra watched as images formed, showing a young species taking its first steps into the galaxy. She saw human diplomats shaking hands with alien leaders. She saw human children laughing in zero-gravity schools alongside the young of a dozen different species. She saw hope and wonder and joy. And then she saw the Jethkarth hive species appeared on the recording like a plague of locusts spreading across the star map with terrifying speed. The Jethkar had destroyed 63 civilizations before they turned their attention to humanity, Xylos explained. They consumed everything in their path and converted all biological matter into new soldiers for their endless swarm. I remember learning about them, Kethra said. They were the great threat of that era. They were unstoppable, Xylos corrected. No species had ever survived a full Jethkar invasion, and when they set their sights on Earth, the Council made a decision that has haunted us ever since. The recording showed a vote being taken in the ancient Council chambers. Species after species voted to abandon humanity to their fate. We decided that helping the humans was not worth the risk, Xylos said, with shame thick in his voice. We calculated that the Jethkar would spend a decade consuming human space, and that would give us time to prepare our own defenses. You left them to die, Kethra whispered. We left them to die, Xylos confirmed. We closed our borders, and we watched from a safe distance as the Jethkar descended on Earth with 1 billion soldiers, and we waited for the quick extinction we had predicted. The recording shifted to show massive Jethkar hive ships entering the Sol system. What we witnessed instead changed our understanding of what a species could become when pushed beyond all limits. Kethra watched as the human defense fleet was destroyed in the first wave. She watched as Jethkar soldiers landed on Earth by the millions. She watched as human cities burned and human populations fled and human children screamed for help that would never come. And then she watched as something shifted in the human response. They adapted, Xylos said. In ways that should have been impossible, they adapted in real time to everything the Jethkar threw at them. The recording showed human scientists working around the clock to decode Jethkar biology. It showed human soldiers developing new weapons and new tactics every single day. It showed human resistance fighters using the Jethkar's own hive link against them by broadcasting signals that drove individual soldiers insane. The invasion that should have lasted 3 months stretched into 2 years, and then 5 years, and then 10, Xylos said. And during that time, the humans learned something about themselves that they had never known. What did they learn? Kethra asked. They learned that they were capable of becoming something terrible, Xylos replied. They learned that their short lifespans and fragile bodies had hidden a capacity for adaptation and endurance and pure stubborn rage that no other species possessed. The recording showed the tide of the war beginning to turn. Human forces pushed the Jethkar back kilometer by kilometer. Human ships began hunting Jethkar vessels across the galaxy. Human Soldiers tracked down every hive world and every hidden nest and every forgotten egg. The HFY had existed for 1 billion years, Xylos said. They had consumed thousands of worlds and trillions of lives, and they had never known defeat. The humans did not just defeat them, he continued, and his voice trembled with ancient horror. The humans erased them from existence completely and utterly, and without mercy. The final images showed the last HFY queen dying in the ruins of her homeworld, while human soldiers watched in silence. When it was over, the humans turned to look at the rest of the galaxy, Xylos said, and we saw something in their eyes that we had never seen before. What did you see? We saw beings who had learned what they were truly capable of, the alchemist replied. We saw a species that had been betrayed by everyone they trusted and had survived anyway, and we saw that they were asking themselves a question. What question? Who else might turn on us? Xylos said, who else might we need to destroy? He fell silent, and the recordings faded away, leaving only darkness and the sound of Kethra's racing hearts. That is why they drew the boundary, she said slowly. They were not hiding from us. No, child, Xylos confirmed. They were protecting us from what they had become and protecting themselves from the temptation to use their new power. Then there may be hope, Kethra said. If they chose mercy, once they may choose it again. Xylos was silent for a long moment. Perhaps, he said finally. But remember this, as you cross into their space ambassador. What? The humans have had 50,000 years to grow stronger, and we have no idea what they have become in all that time. Kethra nodded and turned to leave. She understood now why the galaxy still trembled at the mention of humanity. It was not because of what they had done, it was because of what they could still do if anyone ever gave them a reason. The diplomatic vessel's silver voice drifted alone through the empty space that separated the Concordat's territory from the Soul Exclusion Zone. Kethra stood at the observation window and watched as the last familiar stars faded behind her, and the unknown darkness of human space stretched out ahead like an ocean without shores. She had been traveling for 3 weeks now, and in all that time she had not seen a single other ship or station or any sign of civilization at all. The border regions were completely abandoned. No species wanted to live anywhere near the boundary that humanity had drawn across the stars. Ambassador, a ship's computer announced in its calm, artificial voice. We are approaching the designated crossing. Point and long-range sensors are detecting the presence of an ancient beacon directly ahead. The human warning beacon, Kethra said quietly. I was told about this. Shall I begin broadcasting our diplomatic credentials? Yes, but do it slowly and clearly, and repeat the message in every language in our database. Understood. Kethra took a deep breath and tried to steady her nerves as the silver voice crossed the invisible line that had not been crossed in 50,000 years. For a moment, nothing happened. The stars looked the same on this side of the boundary as they had on the other side. The void was just as empty and just as silent. And then the beacon activated. A burst of light erupted from a point in space directly ahead of the ship, and a voice began speaking in a language so old that Kethra's translation systems had to search through 17 different databases before they could make sense of it. You have entered Terran sovereign space, the voice said, in flat mechanical tones. State your purpose or withdraw, and know that there will be no second request. Kethra stepped forward and activated her communication array. This is Ambassador Kethra of the Volanti Hegemony speaking on behalf of the Galactic Concordat, she said, and she was proud that her voice did not shake. I have come on a mission of peace to request the return of a survey vessel that accidentally crossed into your territory 3 weeks ago. She transmitted her credentials and her mission parameters and all the information she had about the missing ship and its crew. Then she waited. Hours passed with no response. Days passed with no response. On the 3rd day, Kethra began to wonder if the beacon had been nothing more than an ancient recording with no one left alive to hear her plea. On the fourth day, everything changed. Ambassador. Her computer said suddenly, "Sensors are detecting an anomaly directly ahead, and I have no classification for what I am observing." Kethra rushed to the sensor display and felt her heart stop beating for a long, terrible moment. Something was happening to the fabric of space itself. A wrinkle was forming in reality like a fold being pressed into a sheet of silk, and within that wrinkle something was moving toward her from a direction that did not exist. The anomaly lasted for exactly 3 seconds. When it ended, there was a ship floating in front of her vessel. It was small. That was the first thing Kethra noticed. And it confused her because she had expected human ships to be massive and terrifying and bristling with weapons. This vessel was barely larger than a shuttle, and its hull was smooth and elegant and covered in what appeared to be living metal. That shifted and breathed like the skin of some cosmic creature. It was beautiful. It was also, according to her tactical computer, capable of destroying her entire species without any visible effort. Ambassador Kethra of the Volanthi hegemony. A voice said through her communication system, and it was warm and gentle, and nothing like what she had expected. "We apologize for the delay in responding to your arrival, and we have been preparing for this moment." "You knew I was coming?" Kethra asked. "We know everything that happens along our borders," the voice replied. "We detected your survey vessel when it crossed into our space, and we have been caring for your crew members ever since." "They are alive." Kethra felt tears forming in her eyes. "All 47 of them are alive. All 47 of them are alive and unharmed," the voice confirmed. "They were frightened at first, but we have been treating them as honored guests, and they have expressed a desire to return home." Kethra did not know what to say. She had prepared herself for threats and demands and terrible consequences. She had not prepared herself for kindness. "I must ask," the voice continued, "how did you find the courage to cross the boundary when no one has done so in 50,000 years?" "I was ordered to come," Kethra admitted. "But I also volunteered because 47 people needed help, and I could not abandon them, even if it meant my own death." There was a long pause before the voice spoke again. "That is a very human answer, Ambassador. I do not understand what that means." "You will," the voice said. "We would like to invite you to accompany us back to human space, and we would like to show you what has become of our civilization since we withdrew from the galaxy." Kethra felt her entire body go cold. "You are inviting me into your territory." "We are inviting you to see the truth," the voice replied. "You came here expecting monsters, and we would like to show you what we actually are. And if I refuse, then we will return your survey crew to you, and you will be free to leave, and the boundary will remain closed for another 50,000 years." Kethra thought about the choice before her. She could take her people and go home and live out the rest of her life wondering what she had missed, or she could take the greatest risk any member of the Tukistum Concordat had taken in millennia and discover what humanity had become. "I will come with you," she said. "We are pleased." The voice replied, "Please follow our vessel and do not be alarmed by what you see." The small human ship turned and began moving toward the heart of the exclusion zone. Kethra ordered her computer to follow and watched as space itself seemed to bend around the human vessel, creating a tunnel of folded reality that swallowed both ships and carried them forward at speeds that should have been impossible. Through the walls of the tunnel, she caught glimpses of things she could not understand. Structures that existed in dimensions her eyes could not perceive, lights that moved with purpose and intelligence. And everywhere she looked, there was evidence of a civilization so far beyond anything she had ever imagined that she felt like a child standing before the works of gods. "What have you become?" she whispered to herself. The human ship seemed to hear her somehow because the warm voice returned to her speakers. "We have become what we always had the potential to be, Ambassador." "And what is that?" "Patient," the voice said. We have become very, very patient." The tunnel of folded space opened ahead of them, and Kethra saw light pouring through from the other side. She was about to see something that no outsider had witnessed. In 50 millennia, she was about to learn the truth about humanity, and she was more afraid than she had ever been in her entire life. Not because she feared the humans would hurt her, but because she feared that everything she had ever believed about the universe was about to be proven wrong. The tunnel of folded space opened like a flower blooming in fast motion, and Kethra found herself staring at something her mind simply refused to accept. She had expected weapons. She had expected fleets of warships and planet-destroying weapons, and all the terrible machinery of a civilization that had learned to erase entire species from existence. Instead, she was looking at a garden that stretched across the entire star system before her massive structures floated between planets like seeds drifting on cosmic winds, and each one was covered in living green that seemed to glow with its own inner light. Ships moved between these structures, but they did not look like military vessels. They looked like leaves carried by a gentle breeze, and everywhere she looked, there was life and form she had never imagined, life that danced and played and created beauty for no purpose other than the joy of creation. "Welcome to New Eden, Ambassador," the warm voice said. "This is one of the 1,700 garden systems we have created since the boundary was established." 1,700, Kethra repeated weakly. "We have had 50,000 years." The voice replied with what sounded like amusement. "That is a great deal of time when you learn to be patient." The human ship guided Kethra's vessel toward one of the massive floating structures, and as they approached, she realized that it was even larger than she had thought. The thing was the size of a small moon, and its surface was covered in forests and lakes and cities that sparkled like jewels in the light of the distant Suna. Docking port opened to receive them, and Kethra found herself walking through corridors that seemed to have grown rather than been built. The walls were alive with bioluminescent patterns that shifted and changed as she passed. Air smelled like flowers and rain and something else that she could not identify, but that made her feel safe in a way she had not felt since childhood. At the end of the corridor, a human was waiting for her. Kethra stopped and stared because she had seen images of ancient humans in the archives, and this being looked nothing like those recordings. The woman standing before her was tall and graceful, with skin that seemed to shimmer with subtle patterns of light beneath its surface. Eyes were deep blue like the oceans of a living world, and they held a wisdom that seemed to stretch back through countless centuries. "Ambassador Kethra," the woman said with a smile that was warm and genuine, "my name is Sarah, and I've been asked to serve as your guide during your stay with us." "How old are you?" Kethra asked, and then immediately regretted the rudeness of the question. But Sarah just laughed softly. "I am nearly 4,000 years old," she said, "which makes me middle-aged by our current standards." 4,000 years. Kethra felt dizzy. Humans were supposed to live less than a century. "We were," Sarah agreed. "But we have had a great deal of time to improve ourselves, and one of the first improvements we made was extending our lifespans so that we could truly learn from our mistakes." She gestured for Kethra to follow her, and together they walked through the living corridors of the massive structure. "I know what you expected to find here," Sarah said as they walked. "You expected an empire of rage frozen forever in the moment of our greatest trauma." "Yes," Kethra admitted. "I expected monsters." "That is understandable," Sarah replied. "After what we did to the Jethkar, the galaxy had every reason to fear what we might do next." They emerged onto a balcony that overlooked a vast interior, space filled with floating platforms and soaring towers and more green growing things than Kethra had ever seen. In one place, children were playing on the platforms below, human children and children of species Kethra did not recognize. They were laughing and chasing each other through clouds of glowing particles that seemed to respond to their movements. Who are those other children? Kethra asked. Those are the Mallory, Sarah explained. They are one of 17 species we have uplifted from pre-sentience over the past 50 millennia, and they are our friends and our family, and they live alongside us as equals. You uplifted 17 species. Kethra felt like she was going to faint. You created 17 new civilizations. We had a lot of time, Sarah said simply, and we needed something to fill that time. Other than preparing for wars that might never come. Kethra watched the children playing below and felt something shifting. Inside her all her life, she had been taught that humanity was the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known. All her life, she had believed that the boundary existed to contain a species that would destroy everything if given the chance. But this was not what she had expected at all. You built paradise, she whispered. We tried, Sarah said. We were so angry after the HFY War, and after the Concordat abandoned us to die, and for a long time. We considered using our new power to take revenge on the entire galaxy. What stopped you? Sarah was quiet for a moment before answering. We realized that anger is exhausting, she said finally, and that if we spent eternity preparing for war, we would become the very thing we had destroyed. The HFY. Yes, Sarah nodded. They were what they were because they had forgotten how to be anything else, and we decided that we would not let that happen to us. She led Kethra down from the balcony and through a series of gardens where people of many different species worked and talked and laughed together. Then why maintain the boundary? Kethra asked. Why let the galaxy believe you are still a threat? Because fear is the only language the Concordats powerful truly understand, Sarah replied. As long as they fear us, they leave each other alone, and there has not been a major war in the galaxy since we withdrew. You have been protecting us, Kethra said slowly as the realization dawned on her. All this time you have been protecting us from ourselves. We have been giving you time to grow up, Sarah corrected gently. Just as someone should have given us. They stopped in front of a building that looked like it had been grown from crystal and living wood. Your crew members are inside, Sarah said. They have been well cared for, and they are eager to see you. Kethra started toward the building, but stopped and turned back. Why are you showing me all this? She asked. Why not just return my people and send me away? Sarah smiled, and there was something ancient and patient in her eyes. Because it has been 50,000 years, Ambassador, and we have been watching the galaxy grow and change, and we believe that some of you might finally be ready to know the truth. Ready for what? Ready to stop being afraid, Sarah said, and ready to start being neighbors. She gestured toward the crystal building. Go and see your people, Ambassador, and when you are ready, I will show you more of what we have built. Kethra nodded and walked toward the building with her heart pounding in her chest. Everything she had ever believed was crumbling around her, and in its place something new was beginning to grow, something that felt dangerously like hope. Ambassador Kethra stood before the assembled representatives of the Galactic Concordat and looked out at 4,000 different species, waiting to hear what she had discovered in the Forbidden Zone. The Grand Council Chamber was the largest structure ever built by the Concordat, and today every seat was filled with beings who had traveled from across the galaxy to hear her report. Some were massive creatures whose bodies filled entire sections of the stadium like seating. Some were tiny beings no larger than insects who watched from specially designed viewing platforms. Some existed as patterns of pure energy or thought or quantum probability, and all of them were afraid. Kethra could see it in the way they held themselves, and the way they avoided looking directly at her, as if her very presence might somehow contaminate them with the taint of human contact. Honored representatives, she began, and her voice carried through the chamber, amplified by technology so ancient that no one remembered who had built it. I have returned from the Soul Exclusion Zone with the 47 crew members of the survey vessel, Wandering Star. A ripple of relief passed through the crowd. I have also returned with knowledge that will change everything you believe about humanity and about the galaxy itself. The chamber went silent. Kethra took a deep breath and began to tell them everything she had seen. She told them about the garden worlds that stretched across star systems and the living structures that floated between planets like seeds of cosmic beauty. She told them about the 17 species that humanity had uplifted from pre-sentience and the civilizations that now flourished within the boundary. She told them about the humans themselves and how they had changed over 50,000 years into beings of wisdom and patience, who lived for millennia and created wonders that defied imagination. She told them about Sarah and about the children playing in clouds of light and about the simple, terrible truth that the boundary had never been about keeping the galaxy out. It had been about keeping humanity from becoming the monsters they feared they could be. When she finished speaking, the chamber remained silent for a long moment. Then the accusations began. "She has been corrupted," shouted a representative of the Crystalline Collective. "The humans have done something to her mind." "This is propaganda," declared the ambassador from the void. "Dancers, designed to lower our defenses before an invasion. We should destroy her ship and everything she brought back," suggested a being of pure shadow from the dark reaches. "Before the contamination spreads." Kethra listened to the fear and the anger and the denial, and she felt a deep sadness settling into her hearts. "I understand your doubts," she said when the shouting finally died down. "I would not have believed it myself if I had not seen it with my own eyes." "Then prove it," demanded the High Chancellor of the Concordat. "Give us evidence." "I can give you something better," Kethra replied. "I can give you an invitation." The chamber went quiet again. "The humans have opened their borders," she continued. "Not to everyone, and not all at once, but to those who are willing to see the truth for themselves." "This is a trap," someone shouted. "Perhaps," Kethra agreed, "but consider this possibility instead." She paused and looked out at the sea of alien faces. "For 50,000 years we have built our civilizations on fear of humanity," she said. "We have made decisions based on that fear, and we have avoided conflict because we were terrified of drawing their attention. And in all that time, has anyone actually seen what lies beyond the boundary? Silence. The humans could have destroyed us at any point during these 50 millennia. Kethra continued. They had the power and they had the motive after we abandoned them to the Jethkar. But they did not destroy us, she said. Instead they withdrew and they built paradise and they gave us time to grow. Now, they are offering us the chance to be neighbors instead of strangers separated by walls of ancient terror. She spread her arms wide. I am not asking you to trust them, she said. I am asking you to be brave enough to find out if trust is possible. The debate that followed lasted for weeks. Factions formed and dissolved and reformed as species, argued about what to do with the impossible information Kethra had brought back. Some demanded that the boundary be reinforced and all contact with humanity be forbidden forever. Others cautiously suggested that perhaps a small delegation might be sent to verify her claims. A few brave voices argued that if even half of what Kethra said was true, then the Concordat had been living in unnecessary fear for 50,000 years. In the end, the vote was closer than anyone expected by a margin of less than 200 species out of 4,000. The Concordat agreed to send a delegation to human space. Kethra was chosen to lead it. Over the decades and centuries that followed, everything slowly began to change. The first delegation returned with confirmation of everything Kethra had reported. The second delegation brought back scientists who had witnessed human technology that seemed more like magic than engineering. The third delegation included artists who had seen beauty that brought them to tears and philosophers who had debated with beings whose lifespans allowed them perspectives no short-lived species could ever achieve. More and more species began to request passage across the boundary. The trickle became a stream, and the stream became a river, and in the Heart of human space, the gardens continued to grow. Sarah was over 5,000 years old when she stood on the observation deck of New Eden and watched the first Volanthi children playing alongside human children and Mallory children in the zero gravity parks that floated between the stars. Kethra stood beside her, though she was ancient now and her scales had faded from violet to pale silver with age. "You changed everything," Sarah said quietly. "When you crossed the boundary all those years ago, you started something that cannot be stopped." "I did not change anything," Kethra replied. "I simply opened the door that you had left unlocked." Sarah smiled and watched the children chase luminous creatures through gardens that existed between dimensions. "A Volanthi girl asked me once why the old ones still fear humanity," she said. "She could not understand it because to her generation humans are just neighbors and friends." "What did you tell her?" "I told her that we remember what we were capable of," Sarah said, "and that we built all of this so we would never forget." "That seems like a strange reason to build paradise." Sarah shook her head slowly. "We did not build it to remind ourselves of the darkness," she explained. "We built it so that if the darkness ever comes again, we will have something worth protecting." Kethra considered this for a long moment. "And something to return to when the fighting is done," she added. "Yes," Sarah agreed. Exactly that. They watched the children play in silence for a while. Below them, the universe continued its ancient dance of stars and void. Civilizations that had feared each other for millennia were learning to trust. Species that had never spoken were finding common ground. And humanity, the great terror of the galaxy, watched over it all with patience that had been forged in fire and tempered by 50,000 years of choosing peace over power. "The galaxy still fears you," Kethra said finally. "Even now, after all these years, some species still tremble at the mention of your name." "Good," Sarah replied, and her voice was gentle but firm. "Fear kept the peace for 50,000 years, and a little fear is not a bad thing to maintain. But fear is not enough anymore, is it?" "No," Sarah agreed. "Fear kept the peace, but only love can build the future." She turned to look at Kethra with eyes that held the wisdom of 5 millennia. "That is the real reason we opened the boundary. Ambassador, we were ready to stop being afraid. And we hoped the galaxy might finally be ready to stop being afraid, too." In the gardens below, a human child and a Volanthi child held hands and jumped together into a cloud of starlight. They did not know that their ancestors had once been enemies. They did not know that fear had kept their species apart for longer than most civilizations lasted. All they knew was that the universe was vast and beautiful and full of wonders waiting to be discovered, and that they did not have to discover them alone. The boundary still existed on the old star maps, but it was just a line now, just a memory of a time when fear had seemed like the only option. The future stretched out ahead like an endless garden, and for the first time in 50,000 years, both humanity and the galaxy were ready to tend it together.